Hello and welcome to the Business Pulse International channel. On this segment called Leading Edge, where we bring you industry leaders and thought leaders in business that are here to share their principles, share their stories, really engage with us with what it is that they have done that have ensured where they are today and ensuring their success for tomorrow. Now, I've got a very special guest for you who's a treat today. He is the Vice President of Upstream as well as Chairman of Shell South Africa. Now, I'd not be lying to you when I say you would find it really difficult to find a person that is more grounded, a person that is more authentic, a person that is kinder than Mr. Bonang Mohale with the engagements that I've had with him. Now, in his early days, he started off in medical school where he was studying to be a doctor. And he told me that he dropped out of that because he figured he'd be richer if he went in business. So that saw him going into a journey where for 10 years, he solidified his business and management experience within the pharmaceutical industry. Prior to joining Shell South Africa and heading it up, he was part of Drake & Skull South Africa and the Facilities Management Division, where he headed it up as a CEO for 6 years. And during that period, really turned around the company, expanded what it is that they were doing with their portfolio, and ensured that Drake & Skull was in the path that it now is in today. He's held various leadership positions in the past 20 years, having worked for organizations such as South African Breweries, Sanlam, and Otis, which is the oldest and largest elevator company in the world. Now, besides being greatly accomplished, he's also been recognized by his peers, having been conferred an honorary professorship from the University of Pretoria in the field of marketing management. And he was also recognized as a CEO of the Year by IPM in the year 2012. So, Mr. Mohale, it's an absolute pleasure and honor to have you here with us.
Dominic, thank you so much for having me.
I think just to kick us off, I'm really intrigued by your story. Take me back to your early days. So when it is that you got started, because you've had quite a colorful career from where you were, studying within medical school to now being an executive of one of the top companies that we have arguably in the world, that you're heading it up in South Africa. So please tell us a bit about your story, having grown in your career.
So first, a confession. As I was listening to you,
yes,
I couldn't recognize the person that you're describing. And I've had a few conversations with some of our people wearing the Shell hat, sometimes yes, the Otis hat, once in a while the BMF hat. It's the first time that somebody has uncovered that small detail, yeah, that the University of Pretoria made me an honorary professor, because I've always never said a thing about it. I meet with them, I go and consult, we share ideas, we talk about hashtag fees must fall, yes, and roots must fall, in the quiet and the solitude of our room. So thank you very much, yeah, for that introduction. It's very kind. I think my upbringing has been very ordinary, because when you look at the stones in my shoes and the scars on my back, they are very representative of most black South Africans. We want to improve our own quality of lives. We want to better look after our parents. We want to make a contribution in the community that has made us who we are.
Certainly.
We want to acknowledge, highlight, and celebrate our spirituality beyond just religion and indeed Christianity. We're searching for purpose so that at some stage we can say we are useful. This notion of some broader and greater good.
Yes.
And then you say the only passport through that is to go to school.
Sure.
Because your parents say if you don't, you'll be at the back of that coal truck, like those guys that didn't go to
yes,
school. So they instill the fear of God.
Becomes that chance to be able to break away from where it is.
Absolutely.
That you were.
And then you study and you realize that the parents don't have the money to take you to college. Therefore, you go and work at other people's gardens, yes, who by definition at that time could only be white, because we didn't know gardeners and helpers, yeah, working definitely, for other black people at that time.
Take me through that journey. So how was it that you came about to go to medical school? And what were perhaps the reasons or the circumstances surrounding really a change from that trajectory to then deciding to go into business?
So, first of all, I must admit that we didn't have much career guidance. So our teachers knew as much as we did.
Yeah.
Because very few of them had actually been to university. So at that time you do standard 8, we called it junior certificate, and then some of the ones that are not so bright would say, you better go and do teaching, or if you are a lady, nursing.
Sure.
And then at standard 6, because we used to get a certificate at standard 6, they would say, if you a little bit thick, go to Ambach or Technicon or technical
so that
college.
You can do something with
because
your
you're
hands.
not academic, you
Yes.
must use your hands.
Yeah.
Maybe you can be an artisan. So it was during those times that I looked at it and I said, I grew up in Katlehong, looked at that community. There were lawyers, there were teachers, there were policemen, of course. But the richest, with better quality of life, in my opinion at that time, were doctors.
Yes.
Dr. Paling, Dr. Kunene, he drove a Jaguar with 2 petrol tanks. I said,
Back then.
this is a life.
Wow.
They lived at an extension of Katlehong called Admin Center. Even the name was not Mapanga or Katlehong, it was Admin Center.
Yes, very prestigious.
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
where the roofs were not a silicone and asbestos. But this was tile and slate. I said, that's what I want. Yeah. So I wanted to go to medical school purely because I wanted to make the most amount of money in the less possible time. And I went to medical school. Professor Philip Tobias interviewed at that time. Said, why do you want to come to vets? Why do you want to become a doctor? And say, because where I come from, these guys are not too shabby. And he laughed and he says, you know, in my 50 years at vets, I hear all sorts of stories. Help mankind, cure disease. I said, you're the only bagger that told me the truth. You are in.
Absolutely.
So at that time, of course, vets would accept you,
yeah.
but you needed a special ministerial consent from the Minister of Interior at that time. So my consent came in April, even though university started in January. So you couldn't get a student card, you couldn't borrow books from the library, you couldn't eat in the canteen. But that was part of the struggle that shaped who we are.
Because at that period, you were going through segregated South Africa.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. Group Areas Act was still very much in place. In fact, you couldn't even buy a property, even if you could afford it, in those designated white areas. So of course, if we slept in Braamfontein, would break the law. So they housed us at then Baragwanath Hospital, an hour's drive away, and then they would bus us back. So every day I would lose 2 hours, and yet we were trying to catch up with kids that came from good education, good background, were eating better.
Proximity.
Yes, absolutely. So mine has always been a struggle upwards and forwards in exactly the same way that when you talk to every African child, they will almost relate the similar story, having to break studies midterm to go and work, accumulate enough money, and then kind of pick it up. So finishing and studying on record time was unheard of. Not because we were thick, but because we were studying and breaking, make money and come back. So that was
trying to take it through.
Absolutely.
And when you then fell out of medical school, was that as a result of not being able to afford those studies further, or was it something that you consciously did in order to change the path of your life?
So at that time, I think I got lucky. So I go to vets and I see aeronautics department. I see geology, I see engineering. I mean, our teachers never even told us that there is a career path called engineering. So you see these buildings and you engage, interact and interface with other students. So I went on with medicine, a bit prestigious. From second year, you start delivering babies. We went to Alexander Clinic. Third year, you start doing your clinical years. You hang a stethoscope around your neck. People start referring to you as doctor. It's really alluring.
Absolutely.
Passed my fourth year and then woke up one day and met this group of black people called managers. They were driving BMW 318i's at that time. I said, yo, what a life. How much did you cost? I said, no, it's a company car. What do you mean it's a car? They explained, that's what I want to be. So I went back to Vets Medical School, 5th year, January, February, March, 17th of April, 1984. I said, you know what? I'm petrified of my mother. I can't tell her I want to leave, but let me see if I can't find a managerial job. That's when I went hunting.
At least you could say, Mom, I'm not a doctor, but I'm a manager. Something.
Absolutely.
No, certainly. And then let's bring it forward. Now you are chairman of Shell South Africa. I've seen that there's various positions that you've held leading up to it. And really you've transformed a lot of the organizations that you worked within. So coming from your current position within Shell South Africa, can you share with me and some of our viewers what you believe you've done or how you've contributed towards the success of the organization at the moment?
So for me, I look back and say I've been truly blessed with some amazing opportunities. I've had an opportunity to run not one, but 5 companies. When I became the managing director of the world's biggest and oldest elevator company, Otis,
yes.
1996. It was a listed entity on the JSE.
Sure.
I wasn't MD of Otis South Africa. I was MD of Otis Africa. First 3 years I reported to Paris, to Bruno Gropp, a guy who walked and talked like a leader, typical Frenchman. The last 2 years I report to Mario Abajo, Spanish, in Madrid. And again, a truly amazing, good quality human being. So I had an opportunity to learn at the knees of the real masters. So I felt very chuffed. Since then, of course, accelerated through South African Airways, went to Sanlam during Marina's Darling when he was chairman, and we used to call him Mr. Sanlam. But what really turned me on when I had an opportunity together with friends of mine, 5 of us, to start something really new.
Sure.
Drake and Skull Integrated Facilities Management. They brought it to the country for the first time. I became the CEO, having run Sanlam at that time, was the 2nd biggest financial services group after Old Mutual.
Wow.
Came in, humbled myself. We started with 3 employees. We worked out the business plan that says after 5 years we'll sell at a 10 times PE multiple.
Yes.
We don't ever have to work again.
Sure.
We looked for a BE partner, Nozala. They bought 22% stake. They wanted to pay us. We said, no, we can lend the money from Ethos, a private equity. They lend them 1.5 million rand. They put it in. We said, after 5 years we'll sell. 5 years, the global recession hit. We said, hey, wait a bit. We sold on year 6. When we did, we were paid 19.7 times PE multiple after tax, 15 times EBIT multiple. I mean, this must have been a record at that time. And of course, Nozala having put in less than 2 bar, they took out 300 million in 6 years. We started with 3 employees. By the time we sold, we had 76,000 employees. And this was the first deal for Absa private equity.
Because the one thing that I did not realize, so Drake and Skull, I thought, yes, you were the CEO of it. I didn't realize you were part of the founding partners or business people that actually created Drake and Skull as we know it now. So I was employed in one of the organizations, Unilever, and Unilever I think has Drake and Skull that manages a lot of their facilities. So really that's quite some insights. That's like a great value that was created from a business, literally, as you are saying, started from 3 employees. That's amazing.
Absolutely. And at that time, Unilever built their head office in Umhlanga, overlooking the ocean, amongst the
beautiful
sugar.
space.
So all the receptionists, all the people that were doing the cleaning, the catering, were our people, of course, wearing Unilever uniforms. That's when I really fell in love. And by the way, when you talk about Unilever, this was probably one of 4 companies that when we grew up as black people, that produced probably the best black managers with International Business Machine, IBM, SAB at that time, Unilever, Nestle a little bit, but also Shell. Most of the
really producing a great caliber of leaders.
Top.
That's incredible. I think there's a follow-on question with that. If there was one thing that you'd want the viewers of this program to know about the importance of having the right mindset in order to build a successful business or a successful career or perhaps even a fulfilling life, when you think on your story and your life's journey, what would that one thing be for you?
And it's amazing because you do stuff, you don't give it names, you just kind of feel your way in the dark. 10 years later, you look back and then you get asked, say, how did you get to be where you are? Now you reflect and you give it nice names. So in hindsight, I think for me, looking back, I would say 4 things have really stood up for me to characterize this thing that I call success. I've always said to my lovely wife, Susan, because I got married when I was 17.
Yeah, wow.
I said, 1.
And you survived.
And I'm still happily married.
That's incredible.
For 35 years on the 24th of August.
You must teach us how to get that done.
I think Susan is a very patient woman. So I said, first, I need to produce embarrassingly good results at work, because that buys you space around the table so that your voice can be heard.
Yes.
Secondly, I said I want to do so while still happily married to Susan. So it doesn't matter what she does.
Sure.
I chose to be happy in this marriage because I had no option.
And consciously pursue your dreams whilst keeping that unit together.
Absolutely. So I'm a bit of a Catholic. So I took these vows seriously when it said, only death shall do us part.
Yeah.
So I said, I want to remain married to this woman. The third thing I said, we owe everything that we are to our communities, because it's amazing how many people pray for you when you go to a university. When you come back, they are sitting with their letters that are 6 months old and say, Bonang Mohale, please read this for me. And you read letters that are 6 months old because they were waiting for you. So we succeed because of the prayers of many people, but also the counseling, coaching of lots of people that want you so badly to succeed. So I said, I want to be able to go back to my community and give back, because that's how we find meaning. That's how we force ourselves to grow. Lastly, of course, I said I just wanted to acknowledge my spirituality. I grew up making rooibos tea, but we used to use leaves, not tea bags. So I would cook it for my mother on a welcome Dover stove for about 20-30 minutes, and then you use a strainer, Sure. Somehow there'll always be 2 or 3. You look in the cup that have punched through. I thought this is us. Purely lucky to have made it through. There are lots of young, brilliant, clever, hardworking, smart Africans who wanted to be in there, who couldn't. Not because they are lazy, but through no fault of their own, just didn't punch through. I then said, how can we spend our time, energy, and effort to make sure that we improve the quality of lives of these that are less fortunate than ourselves?
Certainly. So what would you define for me is perhaps the one character that when you look back on retrospectively, that's the one character that you've had that's carried you through the years and has enabled not even just for your own career growth, but for other people to recognize that, hey, this is a man we'd like to work with, this is a strategic partner we'd like to take our organization forward with?
So when you are younger, you put on a facade, a face that says, I'm smart, I've traveled the world, I know this. You don't want to ask questions because you think that's what the world wants. 10 years into management, you then realize that, all that your people are asking of you is to be yourself, to be authentic. So for me, absolute authenticity comes at a premium. Because if you can be yourself, then you can afford to be vulnerable, so that young people can look at you and say, if this boy from Katlehong can make it, so can I can do. And that's how you want to touch, not hundreds of thousands of people at the same time, but one soul. So that if you change only that soul and you give them an attitude that at the beginning of the task says, I can. Because our attitude at the beginning of the task determines both our expectations and observations. So if you start with a good attitude that says, it's going to be a good day, nature works with you to connive and conspire to make it a good day. Absolutely. So when you think you can, of course, you're right. But also if you think you can't, either way, you're right. So you rather choose that it's going to be a good day, it's going to be positive, I'm going to succeed. Because we had nothing to lose. At that time, we'd go out in the streets and would say, on crack for necks. Nothing intimidates us because we have seen the depth of poverty, and once we've reached the bottom of the barrel, you can't go any lower. It can only be up.
Sure, no, certainly. Let's take you out of the philosophy and more in the space of business and looking into the future. So what can you see coming in the future for your company and the oil industry? But rightly, I actually think the more pertinent one is the energy industry. All right. And the reason why I ask this is we've come from an era where we've had quite ruthless capitalism, which is based on, having, surplus and operating efficiently. So with the world as it is now, and we know that we want to create a world that will not only be sustainable for our children, but our children's children and children's children's children. What do you see coming in the energy industry?
So first, I've been talking about management up until now. So the one thing that I've learned probably in the last 10 years, 7 years, just as the chairman of Shell Oil Products Africa, is that all we can ever hope to do is to help our people just to recognize probably the 3 attributes of the 21st century. So the first is, how can we enable them to embrace digital tools? Because technology allows us to do stuff now. Secondly, you still also want them to demonstrate their commitment and care for people. And then lastly, you say, so that they can invest in the development of the leaders of the 21st century. Because we lead very differently today from the way we were managed.
Sure.
If you succeed, you'll probably then instill in them, embedded, bone deep, probably the 4 behaviors.
Sure.
Number 1 is to say, can they be in a position to better facilitate team collaboration better?
Yeah.
Secondly, again, to be able to show that the greatest asset is actually our people, not bricks and mortar or the products and services. So that, number 3, they develop this muscle of agility because it rhymes with stability, so that in their own personal lives, they can say, you know what, I am resilient. And then the next one, for them to be able to say, maybe all I can do is to be able to provide critical perspectives.
Yes.
When you put those aside, you bring it into the environment of an energy company like we have.
Yes.
You then say, maybe all we are trying to do at Shell in this context, in this time, in this age when so many of us dare to hope that joy and peace will prevail, is to say, we can use the resources of this company to be a trusted advisor, to be a partner of choice, to do everything possible to ensure that this ANC-led government is a capable state.
Yes.
Because we have found, with a presence in 104 countries, it is better to deal with a capable state than the one that is less capable. So that you can make Shell not a petrochemical company, but an energy company that also is just as passionate about renewables. Because you said something absolutely profound. We must not rest until we have found solutions to leave this world much better for our children than we found it in.
Yes.
Because we haven't so much inherited it from our forebears as we borrowed it from our children.
Certainly, certainly. That's a mouthful. That's a mouthful. And I think there was Peter Drucker who said, we now live in an era of what he calls the 3 C's. It's an era of accelerated change, overwhelming complexity, and tremendous competition. And the things that you're touching on around, using technology, ensuring that we really value the people that we have within our organizations, being conscious in the way in which we do business and working together with capable governments in taking, organizations, countries forward is really something that's key that we need to do. I think, are there any parting shots that you have?
Maybe because you started on Peter Drucker to say, in his characterization of leadership, he's very explicit that in telling and commanding, you're not making yourself a better quality person, but in nurturing and enhancing, that's when you become a true leader. So leaders are about creating and building rather than tearing down and destroying. So the one hope that we have with what we do as leaders is, can we give effect to the South Africa of Rolihlahla, Nelson Mandela, to aid nation building, so that all of us can work very hard to say we want to be the greatest nation in the world. And the only way we can be the greatest nation in the world is to take this notion of nation building seriously. And in there, it's an acceptance that we come from a dark, bad place where we didn't optimally utilize all our resources. Therefore, we need to give everybody a chance to succeed. We should not rest until we've got that done. And if you look at it, it means fundamentally breaking with the past and starting a new South Africa that will make all of us proud. That in English is called transformation. But when you start by saying transformation, to a lot of people, the shutters come down and say, why should I sell part of my business to these black people? Why should I hire them? Why don't they start their own businesses? But we do that because surely equality cannot be justice. What we are dealing with here is 350 years of exclusion, and we've only had 22 years. We need to be saying, can we do more? Because a lot of our people are still not living up to their potential, not even their fullest potential. Therefore, it behooves all of us to do much more than
certainly.
what we've done in the past.
Definitely. And then to conclude, what advice would you have to upwardly mobile professionals and entrepreneurs that are really starting their businesses, wanting to make something for themselves within the current context? What would you say to them in order to keep them in the game and ensure that they really succeed and go for what it is that they have in mind?
Follow your dreams. There are only two things that are required for you to consider yourself a leader. One is you need to develop some sort of a compelling vision, even if it's just yourself. This notion that says tomorrow on a composite basis had to be substantially better than yesterday. Secondly is courage. At the moment, what is lacking in our country is just courage. Courage to be ourselves. Courage not to mimic others. Courage not to wear masks. Courage to speak truth to power. Courage to follow our dreams. Courage to pick up and lift as we rise. Courage to go back to our communities and say, surely it can be that 22 years into democracy, there are still some people that are living in informal settlement, and yet we know that they can do better. Courage to be courageous.
Fantastic. So that's it from us on this program on The Leading Edge. So join us next time as we bring you business and industry leaders, as we share stories, as we share lessons that really will enable you to take yourself from where you are to where it is that you would like to be. So join us again. Cheers.